His face is twisted with despair. Blood clouds his eyes, but even through the pain and horror, he can still see the truth of what is happening. Amid the blazing inferno, a mocking voice rings out. Well, is it warm and cozy in there? I spent a fortune building this trap. The flames rise like a wall of destruction, consuming everything around him. And from within that sea of fire, a lone figure appears. Clad in darkness and armor, the hooded figure looks down at him with one cold, glowing eye. Do you like it? The wounded warrior finally recognizes him. It's you, you rotten Ghislaine. A trap? Are you saying you knew about my plans in advance? But Ghislaine's answer is even colder. Not only that, I also knew. The truth begins to unfold. The troops, the movements, the entire plan, all of it had already been seen through. How many of you there were? Who was spying where? And who sent reinforcements to help you? In the end, the defeated warrior understands everything. From the very beginning, he had been standing in the palm of his enemy's hand, watched by an all-seeing eye that knew every secret before the battle even began. No, this can't be, he croaks, trying to cling to the elusive hope, to his last ace in the hole. A cry of rage erupts from his chest, a mixture of pain and disbelief. How could such a talentless piece of shit do this? The only response is the heavy slam of an armored boot, cutting off his desperate cries. Shut your mouth, comes the icy command. The figure towers over him, undeniably triumphant. The helmet flies off, revealing his words. You may raid as much as you like. I will still win this war. And the next time too, and the next time after that, he declares with a smile full of confidence. Do you know why that is? The young man says, his gaze piercing. Because I know all your plans in advance. But to understand this boundless awareness, we have to go back. Exactly 1 year ago, in the kingdom of Ludania, near the quiet Burdia mansion, completely different events were unfolding. Suddenly waking up, the young man feels his body, trying to understand, what happened? His eyes widen in shock. He's alive, even though just a moment ago, it couldn't have been. It seemed as if the colossal blade was cutting the world in half, heralding the inevitable end. The acrid taste of blood fills his mouth as the last of his strength leaves him, forcing out only one dirty word. Time after time, the blade's blows tear through the flesh, and a scarlet curtain descends upon the world, taking away sight, breath, life. A triumphant silhouette rises above the fallen mercenary king, Ghislaine Burdeum. Well, that's the end of your legend, he says mockingly. It is the noble swordsman Idun, one of the 7 strongest, who declares with a bloody grin, the war is over. Your war. There is no regret in his eyes, only a cold determination to finish what he started, asking for the last word, and in response, only a bitter sigh about unrealized revenge. In his final moments, mercenary king Guy Burdeum musters all his rage to curse his killer. But Idun only smirks, enjoying the agony of his enemy, calling him arrogant. With a small, murderous smile, he reveals the secret, challenging Ghislaine's very past, hinting at an abandoned family and a long-ago tragedy. This deeply buried knowledge makes Ghislaine raise his eyes in amazement. How could a stranger know such a thing? Idun confirms with icy calm. Of course I know. I've been running wild, tracking your past like a hunter hunting for prey. He twists his lips into a predatory grin, revealing the true background of events. It was we, in alliance with the Dolphin clan, who wove intrigues to overthrow your family. The word we echoes in the empty mind, giving rise to horror and mistrust. Shadows appear before Ghislaine's eyes. This means that behind his family's tragedy stood not only Duke Delphine, but also a whole galaxy of conspirators. Idun scoffs at the last flash of understanding, advancing on the wounded man. Why am I explaining all this to you? You're gonna die soon anyway. Just accept your fate. The unbearable pain of betrayal and the realization of the monstrosity of the conspiracy breaks out in a cry full of rage and hatred. You are a monster. I will never forgive you for this. Oh, come on, Idun replies contemptuously, preparing to put an end to this story. And immediately after these words, a wave of blood engulfs everything, marking the final end, destruction, oblivion. But instead of the hellish abyss, he opens his eyes again, feeling the cold water in his own completely intact body. But I'm still alive, and my head is in place. Dumbfounded, he touches his face, feeling the weightlessness of age. Maybe I'm hallucinating? I've even gotten younger. Maybe they gave me over to the mages for experiments, And this is part of some terrible experiment, flashed through his head as he looked at his reflection in the barrel of water. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud, desperate cry. "Young master!" Knight Ricardo appeared from behind the thick curtain, his face expressing a mixture of irritation and relief. "Sir, please come out already. I know you're awake." In response, there was only a hiss, and suddenly a sword appeared in his hands, pointed at the uninvited guest. "I will let you live if you answer the questions obediently." His voice sounded cold and distant, promising quick reprisals. "Or maybe not," he added, a dangerous, ominous light flashing in his eyes. The knight, taken aback by this turn of events, merely muttered, "Young master, this is a bit much, don't you think?" "No means no," Ricardo declared, trying to pull away from the blade, while our hero merely looked perplexed. "What? What's wrong with him? I'm threatening to kill him. What are you even talking about?" he muttered in confusion. Suddenly, the knight rudely pushed him away. "You've worn everyone out with your hysteria, and then you've fallen asleep. What, really?" Ricardo continued irritably. "And you even managed to forget everything after sleeping? You threw a tantrum because you wanted to lead an orc cleansing squad." "Orcs?" the stunned hero asked again, not believing his ears. "What? And I'm throwing a tantrum? What nonsense!" he exclaimed, looking at Ricardo, who had landed. "Come to your senses already. The people are waiting." "What? Where are we going?" he asked, trying to figure out what was happening. "Where? To the Bertium mansion, of course," the knight replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "What?" The word sounded like an explosion, and pure horror was reflected in his eyes. He grabbed the knight by the lapels, demanding confirmation. "Say it again. What? Bertium? You mean that ruined Bertium mansion?" he breathed out, feeling the world crumble around him. And then, before him, a picture appeared that tore his reality apart. A majestic castle, painfully familiar, but untouched by time, stood on a hill surrounded by a peaceful city. This really is the Bertium family mansion. But why is it safe and sound? I personally witnessed the devastation there, he whispered, looking at the flag that once flew over his family home, now restored. But his companion only warned him in fear of the Count's anger, not realizing that the Count himself was standing in front of him. This couldn't be true. It couldn't be reality. And he pinched himself, trying to wake up from the strange dream. A sharp pain brought him back to the harsh reality. He had not slept. Everything fell into place. His young skin, his untouched castle, everything spoke of one thing. Apparently, fate had given him a second chance, throwing him back through the streams of time. But this opportunity brought back to mind all the mistakes, all the blunders he had made in his youth. He was arrogant and reckless, repeatedly bringing shame on his family, and was eventually exiled. Leaving home in disgrace, he fled, escaping his own past. Years later, wandering through foreign lands, he became a mercenary, tempering his will and body in endless battles. With strength and experience, he returned to the lands of Bertium to atone for his mistakes, but found only ashes and ruins. All that remained of his legacy was a tattered banner in a charred wasteland. But now, in this reborn past, the banner of his house flew proudly in the sky, untouched by war. At that moment, looking at his native symbol, hope blossomed in his soul. Joy overwhelmed him, threatening to burst out in an uncontrollable dance. His companion, however, noticed something strange in his behavior, something out of keeping with the ordinary. A puzzled look pierced him, but this was only the beginning of his new, amazing chapter. He remembered the mission his companion had spoken of. Most of their squad had died in battle. Ahead of them lay a horde, led by powerful, ruthless orcs, 24 bloodthirsty creatures that knew no mercy. But even such a number did not seem an insurmountable obstacle for someone who had learned the true strategy of battle. And so, above the hero's head, the first destroyed barricade flies up, breaking with a crunch under an unknown force. The earth shakes under the weight of the blows, foreshadowing a quick, merciless massacre. The soldiers recognized their enemies in horror, whose appearance instilled panic into the hearts of the people. The red giants, like the embodiment of fury, have already broken through the defensive lines. The surprise and speed of the attack make him wonder if the same deadly mistake is being repeated. The deadly whirlwind of battle engulfs one soldier after another, leaving them no chance of salvation. The commander's desperate order is barely audible above the roar of battle and the cries of agony. The commander himself rushes into the thick of things, trying to hold the line, but his strength is already at its limit. The orc's mighty blow throws his soldiers around like dolls, and the commander feels a cold pang of helplessness. The surprise of the attack proved fatal, and the commander realizes that the number of enemies exceeds all reports. The subordinate's piercing scream makes him turn around anticipating a new disaster. A colossal figure looms behind him, raising a deadly axe for the final blow. A devastating blow falls to the ground, leaving only a gaping crater where the man had just been. A powerful hand suddenly grabs the commander by the shoulder, pulling him away from certain death. With incredible dexterity, the hero pulls the commander out of the deadly trap, creating the necessary distance. The commander's eyes show amazement. He barely understands what has happened, but there is no time to retreat. The hero is already standing face to face with the monster, his blade ready for battle. The blade of his sword cuts hard into the flesh, painting the air with bloody spray. Swift movements dance around the huge enemy, each swing bringing pain and wounds. The soldiers, frozen in shock, see something that surpasses all their ideas about battle. The wounded giant roared, his rage mixed with agony as he felt the crushing blow. The earth shook from the monster's fall, but the hero stood unwavering, his gaze cold and determined. Mana was unavailable, and only a bitter thought flashed through my head. If only I had returned a little earlier. He approached the prostrate commander, whose spirit was broken, and asked if he was the one in charge here. The hero extended his hand and bluntly demanded that he be given what he needed. The commander, stunned by such a sudden demand, could only utter a confused, "What?" There was a slight smile on the young man's face, full of confidence, his hand still waiting. The hero's gaze was fixed on the fallen warrior as he directly demanded that the right of command be transferred to him. A storm raged in the commander's head. How can you be such a fool as to demand command when the lives of soldiers are at stake? I can't, the commander answered firmly, turning away, which caused obvious bewilderment in the young hero. The officer explained that he could not simply give up the power granted to him by the Lord, even to the Lord's son, considering it child's play. The hero felt irritated, but at the same time he couldn't help but admit that in the commander's place, he would have acted exactly the same way. Suddenly, the earth shook again as the giant, having recovered from his wounds, rushed into a new attack with a wild roar. "Take cover!" the commander shouted, pushing the hero away, adding that he lacked the experience to lead the knights. The young man's gaze blazed with determination. "It seems I have no choice," he whispered, snatching the blade. With an unexpected and abrupt movement, he waved away the commander, stunning him with his audacity. The young warrior grabbed the officer by the armor, and he, coming to his senses, exclaimed in rage, "What are you doing?" Anger and confusion mixed on the commander's face, his jaw clenched in indignation. But suddenly, through the rage, a strange, inexplicable feeling broke through, causing him to freeze in bewilderment. In the blink of an eye, while the commander was trying to comprehend what had happened, the giant collapsed, with the sword piercing his head, forever silent. Only one last, heart-rending wheeze escaped from the deep wound, marking the end of the monster. Over the giant's lifeless body, with a blade plunged into his skull, stood two men, a witness and an executor. The commander's eyes were filled with disbelief. How could someone he considered hopeless deliver such a precise, fatal blow? He turned to the young man, trying to understand his motives, his state, his knowledge of the essence of any battle. But while the commander was pondering, the remaining orcs, maddened by rage and loss, rushed into battle, and horror once again gripped the hearts of the soldiers. In response to the threat, the young man only grinned, his gaze piercing the chaos. These creatures need only one incentive to fall, and the next moment he himself became that stimulus, rushing headlong into the thick of the enemy, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Like a whirlwind, he fell upon them. His movements were fast and merciless, and every blow found its target. The screams of the orcs mingled with the clang of steel as the youth continued his mad dance of death in the midst of the raging battle. The commander looked on, stunned, trying to comprehend this unthinkable reality. With a bloody sword in his hand, the young man looked at the remaining opponents, his gaze challenging them. "Well, who's next?" He rushed forward with a wild cry, surrounded by enemies, standing on fallen bodies, not knowing fatigue. His movements were graceful and deadly, every lunge precise, every dodge calculated. He darted through the enemy lines like a ghost, striking where they least expected him and vanishing before they could respond. "Is this really a dream?" flashed through the commander's mind as another orc fell at his feet. It was hard for him, a warrior with experience and mana, to hold on, but this skinny boy did the unimaginable, and it is clear that his strength is running out, that every movement is difficult. He didn't waste a single movement, dodging deadly attacks with amazing economy of energy, and each of his blows was aimed precisely at the vulnerable spot, where the armor was thinner and the flesh was exposed. It was as if the spirit of a great swordmaster, deprived of the ability to use magic, had entered this fragile body. The elderly knight's face contorted in silent surprise, not believing what he saw, and the boy, covered in blood and dirt, seemed to only get more excited, shouting that it was just a warm-up. He mercilessly teased the orcs, claiming that they did not live up to their ferocious reputation. The knight's companions watched in bewilderment as the entire crowd of orcs rushed after the boy, not understanding whether he was running or leading them somewhere. And so the commander, with difficulty squeezing out an order, rushed forward, leaving behind his stunned men. His eyes ran the gamut of emotions from anger to understanding as he wondered what the hell this guy was up to. He distantly acknowledged that the boy had done a good job of distracting the orcs, but his subsequent escape remained a mystery. Meanwhile, above the abyss, beyond which lay fields and a peaceful settlement, a castle rose majestically. And then it dawned on the commander. His eyes widened in horror as he realized the boy was heading toward the cliff. "No, not this," he silently pleaded, sensing something terrible was about to happen. With a quick order, he told his men to lock shields and form a defensive wall, preparing for the inevitable. "We will not abandon the master," he growled, determined to share the fate of this reckless hero. Meanwhile, the boy rushed forward like an arrow, leading the enraged horde straight to the edge. His gaze was cold and calculating, despite the blood streaming down his face. Every swing of the sword was measured. He understood that he would not be able to chop them into pieces forever. The forces were unequal, but a sly, anticipatory smile played across his bloody face. The orcs raced after him, shaking the earth with their runs, anticipating easy prey. And suddenly one of them, stumbling, realized with horror that it was a trap. Amid the cries of the stunned orcs, the knights, as if by fate, flew down, and along with them their commander. And then, over the abyss, the triumphant voice of a boy was heard. "Perfect!" The commander, succumbing to impulse, flew down, dragging the last of the orcs with him. But Kale, the true strategist of this battle, is not yet finished with his dangerous game. His roar, full of despair and the will to win, echoed across the gorge. A new wave of knights, driven by furious orders, rushed forward to throw the remaining enemies into the abyss. The clang of steel, the primal cries, the battle flared up with new, desperate force. Adrenaline pulsed in his temples, hiding his fear behind a furious impulse. One by one, then in whole groups, the orcs were mercilessly thrown over the cliff. Their screams were drowned out by the wind. Their bodies disappeared into the bottomless void. The earth shook with the terrible blows that marked their end. The exhausted, bloodied knights stopped as a wave of relief washed over them. "We did it!" A joyful cry of, "Young master!" Their eyes sought the one who had led them to victory. But Kale was not among them. He still hung between life and oblivion. A subtle, sly smile touched his bloodied lips, evidence of a carefully calculated risk. The commander's face, usually impassive, was distorted with sudden horror. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. "Grab the hand!" The desperate words escaped his lips as he lunged forward. Kale's grip on the sword weakened, his strength treacherously leaving it. Through pain and fatigue, he felt himself sliding inexorably into the abyss. Horror gripped the knights' hearts, and a silent, panicked question froze in their eyes. But far from that abyss, someone's tender lips whispered a name like a spell, calling upon fate. In his mind, shaken by chaos, only one name sounded: Elena, a desperate call to an elusive reality. Before his inner gaze, like shards of a broken mirror, flashed fragments of memories of her. Joy, sadness, reproach. And in this strange, ephemeral world, he himself appeared, stretching out his hand to an invisible image. These were his own memories, precious grains of the past, preserving the warmth of his beloved sister. Suddenly, someone's voice pierced the silence, and a familiar hand grabbed him tightly, tearing him from the captivity of illusions. It was she, Elena, bursting into tears, begging him to stay, to come with her. A sharp breath, a burning sweat on his forehead. He emerged from the depths of a nightmare, choking from the horror he had experienced. The familiar outlines of the room slowly emerged from the darkness, but consciousness still clung to the ghosts of sleep. "I'm alive," he whispered, barely realizing that he had returned, that he seemed to have been pulled out of the abyss. So was it just a dream? Or just an echo of the events that tore his soul apart? A sudden piercing pain hit him, causing him to grit his teeth and groan. Every cell of his body ached, reminding him of his crazy adventures and how he had miraculously escaped death. At that moment, someone's figure entered the room, and a gentle voice sounded like a melody from a forgotten past. It was she, Valinda, his personal mentor, whose face lit up with genuine joy. Surprise flashed in his eyes. Valinda, whom he remembered from another time, another life. Her words, full of care and slight reproach, sounded like the most precious reminder of home and those who were waiting for him. And then, unable to contain the overwhelming emotions, he hugged her tightly, clinging with his whole being to this living thread from the past. "I'm just glad to see you," he whispered, realizing the depth of his affection and loneliness. Valinda, his devoted mentor, was always there, steadfastly enduring his childish pranks and early mistakes. But in that past life, after the fall of his house, she was never found, leaving only ashes and scraps of memory. Her embrace, so familiar and warm, momentarily erased the boundaries between past and present. But the truth he carried was heavy, and every breath was difficult for him. With a trembling voice, he tried to convey to her the full horror of what was to come, but her mind refused to accept such news. As if on the edge of an abyss, he froze, preparing to reveal his most terrible secret. "I've returned from the dead," he whispered. But Valinda just waved it off, attributing it to the aftermath of the battle. She suggested, ironically, that misfortune would sooner befall him than their house if he continued to talk such nonsense. Her voice was stern, filled with concern for his reputation, but he understood that her heart was closed to his revelations. Trying to redirect his attention, she reminded him of the upcoming festival, as if it were the most important thing to worry about. The word festival echoed vaguely within him, awakening long-forgotten images. With a playful smile, she reminded him of Lady Elena, who was looking forward to their joint trip to the festival. The carefree past was frozen in the frame of the old photograph, and Valinda seemed to see in this a chance for them to get closer. He picked up the image, and suddenly, the past came crashing down on him with deafening force. Before his eyes appeared the remains of what had once been his home, and the lonely figure of a child, lost in the darkness. As if awakening from a dream, he abruptly asked about the dates, and Valinda casually answered that the festival was already next week. He froze, realizing that time was catastrophically short, and every moment was precious. At that moment, like a harbinger of trouble, a gentle child's voice was heard behind the door. His eyes widened in horror, because he remembered that it was from this moment that the nightmare began. Little Elena stood in the doorway, her face distorted by crying, her hand extended towards him in a desperate appeal. A week later, this innocent girl was destined to die. He rushed forward, hugging her tightly, as if trying to hold her back from the inevitable with his grip. Her innocent eyes widened in surprise, and a slight blush filled her cheeks as a strong embrace closed around her. Shock and embarrassment gripped Elena as the man, holding her close, questioned her about her strange behavior. He pressed her tighter and tighter, his eyes closed as he whispered words of longing that sounded like an echo from the distant past. But a sudden push threw him back, and Elena's frightened cry pierced the silence, causing the man to stumble. He staggered, startled by her unexpected strength, and the thought flashed through his mind. Had she always been like this? Elena, full of indignation, demanded an explanation, while he tried to find some connection that she had no idea about. The next moment, anger overwhelmed him, and he showered her with a stream of cruel words that seemed to thicken the air. Elena froze, amazed, and he, as if awakening from a spell, was horrified by his own words. Memories of his past life came flooding back to him, and with a heavy sigh, he forced out an awkward apology. Surprise was evident on Valinda's face, and she even suggested that the orc attack might have damaged his mind. He categorically denied this, declaring his victory, although his irritation grew, as if everyone was questioning his intelligence. Elena only chuckled, reminding him that it was his lifeless body that had to be dragged after this dubious victory. Her words were stinging, but for a moment there was an atmosphere of almost familial warmth in the air between the girls while he remained on his knees. His gaze, full of hidden power, pierced space, and a mysterious half-smile played on his lips, which foreshadowed something else. An image of the past flashed. He leaves, leaving her alone in the middle of a festive garden, illuminated by distant fireworks. Her childish face is distorted with despair. She reaches out to him, unable to contain a cry of pain and pleading, and only the bloody cloth thrown on the ground testified to the tragedy that left behind only bitterness. He dug his fingers into the fabric of his chest, trying to suppress the surging emotions. A painful lump lodged in his throat. A sudden knock on the door broke the tense silence, and someone's voice from outside asked permission to enter. Two knights appeared at the threshold, their armor glittering, and their faces lit up with smiles as they respectfully greeted Elena. He was tormented by questions. Why Elena? Why these strange requests? The housekeeper, seeing his bewilderment, explained that my lord was too idle and out of the loop. The estate was simply short of hands, and even the ladies had to work. And Elena, already holding the basket in her hands, quickly said goodbye, throwing the knight parting words to take care of himself. Unexpectedly, having changed into simpler clothes, Ghislaine declared that he was ready to help himself. Elena froze, her eyes widened in shock, and a slight blush appeared on her cheeks. The housekeeper and Elena exchanged glances of utter bewilderment. How could he suggest such a thing? Had my lord completely lost his mind? The market was bustling with life. Hundreds of voices merged into a single hum, and every corner was filled with bustle. But his good intentions quickly met with harsh rejection. Local workers bluntly drove him away, declaring that his presence was only a nuisance. He was taken aback by such hostility, but Elena firmly pulled him aside, begging him to just sit still. That way, he would be more useful. But even this minor skirmish reminded him of the terrible vision where Elena's body was discovered near the slums, far from the festive bustle. To prevent tragedy, he needed to understand how Elena could have left the castle, having found all possible entrances and exits. Suddenly, heavy footsteps began to clatter on the cobblestones, and someone's voice cried out excitedly, "Mr. Ghislaine!" Ghislaine turned around, his gaze clearing as he tried to recognize the familiar, yet slightly forgotten face. It was the old knight Fergus, who, bending his knee with tears in his eyes, cried out, "You are safe! Thank the gods!" The loyal servant explained that he had rushed over as soon as he heard the news from the squad that was clearing out the orcs, and he impulsively hugged Ghislaine, who was slightly embarrassed. Elena, giggling, advised the old man to take my lord back to bed, saying that he had just woken up and was behaving strangely, which completely infuriated Ghislaine. Well, nothing could be done. So far, his reputation did not allow him to act openly. He decided to gradually gather information about the castle until the end of the week, and then, turning to Fergus, asked about the abandoned training ground. "To train, of course," he answered the old man's puzzled question with an unperturbed expression. The young gentleman's words took the old knight by surprise, causing genuine amazement. The end point was clear, rising majestically against the sky. His eyes widened as they entered the walls of this ancient place. A huge hall stretched out before him, surpassing all his expectations. "Perfect for training," he muttered, while the old knight next to him looked around with undisguised surprise. Every weapon, every shield, everything shone with purity, ready for battle, as if waiting for its moment. The old knight, as if he had seen the light, felt that the fate of this young man had finally turned around. But the young gentleman's gaze slid past, lingering on the figure of the knight diligently tidying the hall. At that moment, he realized something more than just loyalty. "Death does not suit me, old man. I want to live long," said the young man. And the knight only bowed his head in bewilderment. "You always got to the root of the matter. I really did die, and then was reborn," he chuckled, to which the knight merely waved it off, considering it a joke. "You are free, old man. I will take up my training," said the youth, and the knight, with his usual obedience, promised to wait outside. Their paths diverged for a moment, but the unbreakable connection between them was felt in the air. Warm memories of two laughing girls in simpler times came flooding back to the old knight, and the young gentleman, leaving the past behind, stepped towards his new path. Power, coats of arms, family castles, all this was part of his legacy, which he once lost. And the bloody battlefields, where the banner with the image of the white wolf fluttered, were an echo of that loss. Now, with his eyes closed, he seemed to see these pictures, these long-forgotten pains. But then the eyes opened wide, filled with new determination. "Let's start from here." He sank to the floor in the very center of the spacious hall, preparing for the first step. Although it may be difficult, the mana pathways must first be opened so that true power can flow into him again. He sank to the floor in the very center of the spacious hall, preparing for his first step. It might be difficult, but first he needed to open the mana pathways so that true power could flow into him once again. He falls into deep meditation, and the ancient symbols on the floor respond, flickering with blue light. His mind is carried away to dark memories, to the battlefields where he honed his merciless power. Focusing his will, he gathers streams of mana like invisible threads, twisting them into a single whole. For someone who has fought thousands, no, tens of thousands of battles, who has seen death itself face to face, creating a mana core is a trivial task. But it wasn't just ordinary practice that made him one of the 7 strongest swordsmen on the continent. Its true power lay in the ancient forbidden knowledge hidden within the tattered pages. The natural mana core is just the beginning. He's ready to create 2, no, even 3. A scream erupts from his chest as intertwining cores of mana tear him apart from the inside, creating an unimaginable web. The force rages like a furious, unstoppable fire, threatening to consume him. With a heavy exhalation, he returns from this mad trance, scarlet blood running down his chin. 3 cores is his limit for now in this new, weakened body. In his past life, he could have created all five. Evidence of struggle and pain leaves scarlet, burning marks on the cold stone. He remembers the times when his power was limitless, when entire armies fell to dust before him. This technique, although imperfect, is now his only way, and his young body gives him promise for the future. He rises, and steel flashes in his eyes, foreshadowing a cruel, inevitable revenge. The villains of the Dolphin Clan and their minions, who had a hand in the fall of his family, will pay for everything. He will destroy them to the last one. A week passes, and the festival day blooms over the city, painting the sky with soft twilight colors. His hands habitually tighten his belt, attaching to it the trusty blade that has become a part of him. Each piece of equipment snaps into place with a barely audible click, ready for the day ahead. Elena freezes in shock, her eyes widening at what she sees, as if she had witnessed a miracle or an inexplicable phenomenon. Her voice, full of genuine surprise, betrays the shock of his unexpected appearance, because he always avoided such celebrations. But he only brushes it off, citing his duties as heir. With a slight smirk, she notes his sudden progress, reminding him of the rumors that he literally never left the training room. He rubs his neck in displeasure, trying to feign indifference to her words, but she quickly puts him in his place, reminding him of his previous, directly opposite beliefs. Her words hit him like an invisible blow, taking him back to the times when he despised his role and dreamed of power without ceremony. However, Elena quickly changes her anger to mercy. Her smile becomes wider and her words become more pleasant, speaking of the joy of his changes. She looks somewhere up. A dreamy smile plays on her face, as if it seems to her that the old him has returned, the one she has been waiting for so long. But the hero, absorbed in his thoughts, remains silent, his gaze directed into the distance, where the threads of fate are woven. His eyes, deep and penetrating, narrow as if he sees through the veil of everyday life, analyzing every element of the surrounding reality. Meanwhile, in the festive square, an old maid anxiously instructs two guards, begging them to keep an eye on the young master and prevent possible trouble. A multi-dimensional chess game unfolds in his mind, where the main events remain unchanged, but his every action can radically change the course of small details. Therefore, every move, every decision must be calculated with maximum precision in order to choose the most effective path in any situation. His hand deftly snatches something from the pouch attached to his belt, a small object that could be the key to the next step. Together with Elena, he looks around the holiday shops, stopping at a counter with fragrant bread, and Elena, with childish spontaneity, orders baked goods. Then they take off, his hand gripping hers securely, and they race through the crowd, disappearing into the whirlwind of celebration. Finally, as dusk falls over the majestic castle, Elena exhales, admitting that the day was full of fun. But even at this moment, she cannot hide a slight disappointment, wondering if nothing new will happen this year either, since the monotony has already become boring. He internally laments that the festival is almost over and nothing noteworthy has happened, and he can't help but wonder if this is because he spent the whole day next to Elena. A sudden thought strikes him like a flash of lightning, and his eyes focus sharply, sensing something important. And as if on cue, a knight in shining armor appears right in front of them, inviting Elena to go to a newly discovered entertainment. Elena, beaming with anticipation, rushes off to meet the promised fun, while Ash watches her with a vague unease. But there is something else in his gaze, a cold awareness that behind this facade, there is someone's carefully thought-out plan. And on Elena's sides, like predators lurking in the shadows, loom the figures of knights with eerie smiles. How could she not trust them? After all, they had been her constant bodyguards since birth, their loyalty never in doubt. Once again, Ash's gaze, piercing and full of suspicion, returns to the two. These same eerie grimaces now seem like an ominous omen, tearing apart the veil of gullibility. Finally, they arrive, but instead of the promised fun, they find a dull and deserted alley. The empty, cobbled streets and lack of any activity only add to the feeling of being trapped. Elena's disappointment is obvious. What is this? There's nothing here. How can you have fun in such a wretched place? The knight tries to calm her down, promising a quick introduction, but his words sound like a pathetic excuse. As I thought, flashes through Ash's mind, his face hardening with determination. What at first glance seemed like an ordinary alley now appears to be a carefully planned trap. Blocked escape routes, every crate and barrel. Everything here is placed with intent. Elena, sensing something is wrong, tries to take her brother away, but the knight insists, holding them back. Ash is surprised by the force with which his sister pulls him away, but receives no response. Suddenly, one of the knights pushes Elena, causing her to cry out in surprise. The knight's face contorts into a grimace of fear, and he begs them to wait. Frightened Elena, recognizing the knight as Philip, cannot understand what is happening. Another figure emerges from the shadows, looming over them, and Elena asks in despair, "What's wrong with you?" The knight, as if waking up, lowers his gaze, uttering words full of false remorse. The knight grins, his words about order ringing like a death sentence. Elena, her face distorted with incomprehension and horror, tries to comprehend what she has heard. But the knight is already turning away, his steps marked by cold indifference. At that very moment, new shadows emerge from the darkness, moving towards their destiny. One of them, a certain Frank, notes the success with a satisfied grin. He reminds the knight of the deal, emphasizing the cynical nature of what is happening. But Frank's gaze lingers on Elena's young companion, and there is a hint of bewilderment in his voice. Jamal, dismissively waving it off, calls the young man a bonus, emphasizing his insignificance. And then the young man, gritting his teeth, turns to Jamal, throwing accusations and challenges in his face. The knight merely waved them off mockingly, anticipating escape and indifferently dismissing their fates. His words sounded like he was tired of these cursed lands, of the barbarian raids, of everything that kept them here. He asked with a grin if not everyone runs away from Burdeum like the plague. But a moment later, when Jamal relaxes his mockery, the young man strikes. Blood sprays from the knight's mouth, his eyes wide in shock and pain. Elena and Frank freeze, shocked by the suddenness and cruelty of what is happening. The young man stands over the fallen Jamal, the blade in his hand glowing with an ominous light. His gaze, full of cold blue flame, is directed into the void, as if asking, "Isn't it so?" But another knight, with wild fury, grabs Elena, trying to avenge the fallen. However, the young man moves faster than thought, and the blade pierces the skull of the last traitor. Horror and an unimaginable awareness of the end are frozen on the knight's face. It's over. In the blink of an eye, two knights have fallen, and the girl clings to the young man, unable to believe what's happening. In the shadows, meanwhile, other figures are already discussing what happened, not believing their eyes and whispering about the identity of the mysterious killer. Their leader, a man with a keen eye, recognizes the young man as the Burdeum's eldest son and is shocked by the speed and brutality of the massacre. It is clear that such power could not have appeared out of nowhere. The power of the invested mana can be felt in every movement. The little sister, trembling with fear, begs her brother to explain this bloody spectacle, not understanding what is happening. But on his face there is only cold determination, leaving no room for consolation or explanation. He gently but firmly pushes her away from him, interrupting her attempts to speak. "Get some rest," he says quietly, laying her down to shield her from the coming battle. Again the voice from the shadows, this time with a hint of mockery. "Thank you for doing our job, heir." He approaches, assessing the scene of carnage, and notices that the young man does not at all resemble the one rumored. Through the smoke of his pipe, he asks if the young man had been hiding his true abilities, involuntarily revealing his surprise. In response to this, the young man only calmly shakes the blood off the blade, ignoring the stranger's curiosity. 3 flashes through his thoughts as he changes his sword and assesses his opponent's strength. The two behind the leader seem insignificant, but he himself exudes an abnormal amount of mana, noticeable even from a distance. It's better to end this as soon as possible, the young man decides, and his body begins to emit a glow of pure energy. "Who is your client?" he asks, to which he receives only a caustic answer about the uselessness of the information for a dead man. "I didn't expect you to crack so easily," the young man remarks indifferently, accepting the challenge. "But now I'll get you talking." His eyes flash a bright blue, foreshadowing a fierce battle. The leader's henchmen prepare to attack, but he stops them, ordering them not to kill, but only to break their limbs. He wants the young man to suffer in powerlessness because, according to him, a true masterpiece is born only through a lesson in pain. The subordinates rush forward eagerly, their sharp blades flashing in anticipation. But the young man is not broken. His gaze burns with determination, and something unexpected is hidden in his hand. With a sharp movement, he launches a small metal rod into the air, which begins to spin. One of the attackers is perplexed, taking this for a ridiculous joke right in front of his face. However, the joke turns into a deafening blow, and the rod sinks into the enemy's forehead with a disgusting crunch. The first opponent falls to the ground, and the young man, having drawn his blade, is ready to meet the second. Metal rings on metal as his sword easily deflects the attack, sparks flying from the collision. The young man's eyes flash with an ominous blue light, foreshadowing imminent retribution. He strikes with a swift blow, piercing the enemy who, just a moment ago, considered himself a hunter. The wounded enemy flies to the side, his hood slipping down, revealing a face distorted with pain. The deadly dance continues. The young man turns and another silhouette collapses, painting the cobblestones crimson. Suddenly, he ducks, sensing something above his head, instinctively avoiding the invisible threat. It was the leader himself who, taking advantage of the moment, tried to crush the young man's head with his heavy pipe. But the young man, like the wind, manages to cross the swords above himself, blocking the powerful blow. The leader is stunned, unable to understand how his opponent managed to parry the attack that came from the dead zone. Without giving him time to come to his senses, the young man instantly changes his stance, preparing for his own attack. Like lightning, he rushes forward, closing the distance and delivering a lightning-fast lunge. The blade pierces the flesh, and a vial of mysterious liquid falls from under the leader's cloak. The bottle shatters on the ground, its contents spilling out into a dark puddle. Now the young man towers over his wounded opponent, his sword raised for the decisive blow, his eyes burning with an indomitable flame. Their blades cross again, sparks fly, filling the air with the tension of battle. The old magician, although shocked, maintains a smug grin on his face, acknowledging the youth's strength. The young man grits his teeth, stunned by how his opponent withstood his deadly blow, using pure mana as cover. Mana gathers around the old man's blade, its power growing, heralding a new round of the duel. A sinister grin distorts the magician's face, and his eyes reveal a merciless promise of imminent retribution. Again, he mutters mockingly through his teeth that the young man was close, but not strong enough to get past his defenses. The old man's hand tightened its grip on the hilt, and the blue glow of mana around him grew brighter. Suddenly, the mage himself goes on the attack, his blade wrapped in streams of blue energy, and he rushes forward. His wild eyes reflect the anticipation of final victory, and he shouts out his terrible prediction. But the young man, squeezed between the blades, suddenly grins crookedly in response, hiding something unexpected within himself. This makes the enemy shudder, because there's neither fear nor despair in the young man's eyes. And the next moment, something incredible happens. A sharp kick throws the magician away. The young man doesn't give him time to come to his senses, delivering a series of swift but light blows to the body. The old man staggers back, a hoarse cough escaping his mouth that foreshadows something worse. Blood runs down his chin, but the mage still tries to hold on, denying the effectiveness of the wounds he received. But his body betrays him, and with another coughing fit, he falls to his knees helpless. Horror freezes in his eyes, because the young man's blows, although they seemed weak, pierced his defense right through. At this moment, when the enemy is finally defeated, the young man speaks words that reveal a dark truth. An ominous crimson mana swirls around him, and his gaze is directed straight at the defeated mage, accusing him of a terrible conspiracy. The young man's face is filled with burning rage as he prepares for the final push, unleashing the true power of his third core. The magician, shocked, feels an unknown force growing around the young man, and his mind refuses to understand this madness. And now, like a meteor, he falls from above, raining down a hail of blows filled with a newfound, wild fury. The mage barely manages to dodge, but even his experienced gaze can't keep up with the lightning-fast attacks. Swords cross, sparks pierce the air, each blow shakes the earth, as if the battle is being waged not by men, but by titans. A furious fire burns in the young man's eyes, leaving no chance for retreat or mercy. His movements became a single stream, pure, merciless energy, sweeping away any obstacles. Desperately trying to block, the mage feels his limbs go numb from the incredible force put into each strike. His blade begins to crack, unable to withstand the onslaught, and his mind clings to long-established truths about the limits of human mana. Never before had he seen such a way of releasing mana. Its powerful gusts seemed like something out of legend. The youth was transformed, becoming the embodiment of destructive force, as if death itself had taken on the guise of a mortal. Glass shards shatter, and the sword's tip finds its mark, piercing flesh through his defenses. With each new blow, blood flies out of the magician, coloring the air in crimson tones. But the young man does not stop. Pain pierces his body, and the mage's distorted face reflects all the agony and horror of what is happening. The insatiable rage still burns in the young man's eyes, forcing him to continue this bloody dance. A crushing blow from the fist sends the mage down, spraying fresh blood around. A shrill cry of pain erupts from his chest, but even it cannot drown out the determination of the winner. Another blow, and the magician's old teeth fly out, leaving a bloody trail on his broken face. Over the fallen body, among the debris and dust, the young man calmly says, "Shall we continue our conversation, friend?" He abruptly lifts the magician by the chest, puts a dagger to his throat, and in an icy tone demands the truth. Who ordered you to do this? But even on the brink of life and death, the magician is not going to give up so easily, hiding the last dagger in his bloody hand. The desperate mage, despite his wounds, is determined not to leave alone, clinging to his last chance for revenge. With a wild cry of "Die!" he launches into a final attack, trying to plunge his blade into his captor. But the blow freezes in midair, as if it had hit an invisible wall, and strange red threads flash around his wrist. The protagonist, getting ahead of him, intercepts the magician's hand and calmly offers a deal. His gaze is piercing, and his words sound like a promise of immediate reprisal if the magician does not cooperate. The magician, numb with pain and horror, realizes that these red threads are pure mana, depriving him of any ability to move. Like a web, his mana wraps around his opponent, holding them in absolute control. With an ironic grin, the hero reminds the magician that his own wounds are only a small price to pay for his insolence. Then his tone turns deadly serious as he threatens to destroy the very essence of a mage, his mana core. Realizing the gravity of the threat, the magician lets out a desperate cry. The dagger thrust into the chest begins to pulse with dark energy, slowly penetrating the vital organ. A piercing scream erupts from his throat as the energy begins to tear him apart from the inside. He feels his mana dissipating, his life force leaking through the cracks in his magical core. In a panic, the magician tries to reach the hero's mind, warning of an imminent catastrophe for both of them. But the protagonist only smiles mockingly, confident in his strength and control over the situation. The magician sees the ruthlessness in his eyes and realizes that this is not a bluff, but a firm intention. A dark shadow of a skull flickers in the depths of the hero's pupils, and the magician understands that inevitable death awaits him. Overcome with horror, he finally breaks down and screams out the name of the one behind all this. The magician reveals all the details, revealing a monstrous conspiracy and the true motives for the murder of the hero's sister. With icy calm, the hero considers what he has heard, and a flame of cold, ruthless determination flashes in his eyes. The hero immerses himself in the memories of the magician, seeing conspirators weaving their webs in the shadows of the night forest. The hero's consciousness boils with rage. He squeezes the magician's throat, seeing in this abomination the purpose for which his sister was sacrificed. Every word, every detail only adds fuel to the fire of his anger. Blood blinds his eyes. The magician is in agony. His pleas for mercy are lost in a gurgling wheeze. But the hero no longer has time for pity. In response to this horror, the hero only grins coldly, reminding the old killer of his own sins. The pupils narrow to thin slits, and this devilish laughter serves only as a prelude to retribution. The mage, bleeding to death, still tries to sow the seeds of doubt, claiming that his death will not change anything and no one will believe his words. But the hero doesn't listen. He throws him to the ground, not allowing him to continue his threats about the coming war. He holds the magician with an imperious hand, preparing to explain to him how deeply he is mistaken. The hero's eyes glow with determination. This time everything will be different, and the old rules no longer apply. The magician's final cry echoes throughout the night village as the hero draws the last of his life force from him. A pillar of purple light shoots into the sky, marking the end of one villain and the beginning of something much greater. Exploding in the sky into thousands of sparks, this energy serves as an ominous fireworks display over the blood-soaked streets. Other victims lie on the pavement, their death rattles fading into the silence of the night. Their eyes, full of horror, were frozen forever, reflecting the last moments of torment. The hero, bloodied and exhausted, looks down at his fallen enemies. Among the dead bodies, he sees a silhouette, painfully familiar, and for a moment, his heart stops. The sword hits the ground with a thud, releasing the weight of the justice just delivered from his hands. He throws his head back, trying to breathe in air, but each breath is difficult. And then, at the moment of apparent relief, his face is distorted by a grimace of unbearable pain, foreshadowing a new round of suffering. Pain pierces his body, bursting from his lungs with a desperate cry and splashes of blood. The taste of blood on his lips, the bitterness of defeat. He remembers a time when the price of power did not seem so exorbitant. But even in this agony, his spirit is not broken, and he vows not to give up, no matter what. Rising, he rushes forward, and behind him there remain only ruins and bodies that hold dark secrets. The gaze slides over the lifeless bundle, and the enemy's words take on a terrifying meaning. There is more than one victim here. The image of another man standing before the emblem of power emerges in his memory, linking the past with the present tragedy. This noble son fell victim to intrigue, his name tarnished, his death hidden under a veil of lies. He realizes a monstrous conspiracy to kill all the witnesses and accuse them of Elena's murder. If the truth comes out, an inevitable war will break out that will engulf the entire continent. To prevent a catastrophe, it is necessary to erase the traces and get rid of evidence that could provoke a massacre. With a gravely wounded Elena on his shoulders, he vows to thwart the sinister plans of those behind it all. In the shadows, high up, a mysterious cloaked figure silently watches their flight. With an elusive movement, the shadow breaks away from its hiding place, ready to act. Meanwhile, in a hidden chamber, grim cloaked figures berate their envoy for his failure, questioning his competence. Broken and humiliated, the messenger tries to justify himself, but the words get stuck in his throat. Finally, he cries out a name that can explain his failure, a name that inspires fear and respect. But his words evoke only ridicule and mistrust. For them, this name is not synonymous with a threat, but with a useless loser. A voice full of contempt echoes throughout the room, pointing to Ghislaine's reputation as a worthless idiot. The messenger's eyes sparkle with anger and impotence, and drops of water run down his face, mixing with despair. But at this very moment, somewhere in the distance, the real Ghislaine, whose name is so despised, shows his true, deadly power. An ominous fire, a harbinger of a storm, burns in his eyes, reflecting deadly determination. He tears through his enemies, each blow of his blades a song of fury, leaving only death in his wake. And in this chaos, through the burning streets, he carries the wounded man, saving what little remains. His silhouette in the fire seems to embody inhuman resilience, as if an ancient demon had awakened within him. A shrill cry of pain or despair erupts from his chest as magic tears him apart from the inside, granting him insane power. He runs, not noticing the fire and blood, his gaze directed only forward, towards the elusive hope of salvation. While Ghislaine fights for survival, somewhere far away, in the luxurious halls, the messenger begs for a last chance, vowing his readiness to start a war. But his pleas are met with only scorn and rage, for the mission's failure has turned into a disaster, and trust has been exhausted. The sentence is cruel and merciless. He is thrown away like a broken thing. His life is now worth nothing. Left on the floor, he looks up at the ceiling, where the light patterns now seem like a mockery of his despair. Suddenly, a voice comes from the shadows, full of ominous interest, offering a seemingly impossible way out. The messenger, clutching at his last straw, shouts out the name with which he hopes to buy his life. "I will eliminate Ghislaine Birdium." His face is distorted with determination, and the flame of madness burns in his eyes, because he has the last, but sure, trump card. Mysterious figures in the shadows wait, their silent question demanding the name of this hidden force be revealed. And the messenger pronounces the name of Cain, a great warrior whose might and mastery of the sword are renowned everywhere. Cain is the living embodiment of destruction. No warrior in all the north can match his deadly force. And most importantly, Cain is Ghislaine's cousin, making him the perfect weapon for internal strife. Silence hangs in the air. Then comes an approving nod from the deep shadows. But every decision has its price, and a stern warning sounds like a death sentence. His new chance is shrouded in darkness, because the slightest mistake will result in his inevitable death. Every movement is calculated. Every swing of the blade is an echo of the former power that he strives to regain. His eyes reflect determination, mixed with the painful realization that the path to redemption is thorny. The unexpected appearance of the old knight interrupts his solitude, filling the training hall with a new shadow. Fergus's face expresses genuine amazement. He cannot comprehend what he sees, as if an abyss of the unknown has opened up before him. In response to the silent question, the young man only casually demonstrates his secret, a hovering blade subject to his will. These are threads of mana that allow him to control the weapon, making it an extension of his own flesh and spirit. The technique, honed in a past life at the cost of incredible effort, is reawakened, although it requires the depletion of every grain of strength. But even one thread is get closer to the previous level of mastery, to that incomprehensible power that was once lost. Fergus is stunned, his years of experience and knowledge of magic crumbling under the onslaught of this incredible, impossible sight. Words are powerless to express his shock. Only a silent sigh escapes from the depths of his soul. Having recovered from the shock, the old knight remembers his visit, the urgent message that almost slipped his mind. The young man, catching his hint, silently asks about the reason for such an important visit. A conversation begins between them that foreshadows changes, whose echoes will spread far beyond the castle walls. A modest admission of duty fulfillment is only a small part of a vast mosaic of events. Meanwhile, the majestic castle continues to keep its secrets, and around it life, filled with intrigue, rages. The festival is canceled for the safety of the young lady, whose position is once again under threat, as if fate is pursuing her. But no one believes her words about salvation, for the truth is often too incredible for those who prefer to live in deception. She doesn't care what people say about her, because deep down she knows the truth, even if the whole world has turned its back on her. The anger and righteous indignation of one of the maids only adds fuel to the fire, revealing the treachery and baseness of those who sought power. And he, the keeper of the secret and the savior, only silently watches the flaring passions, knowing that every secret has its price. Behind the massive doors in the shadow of the majestic castle, he awaits his breakfast. But it seems that his soul is uneasy. His eyes reflect knowledge of hidden intrigues, of the fact that true strength lies not in titles, but in power. The maid's apology seems to be addressed not only to him, but to the entire situation brewing in the air. He understands that to achieve what he wants, he needs more than just wealth. He needs unlimited power. However, on his plate, instead of abundance, lies only a modest slice of bread, a symbol of lost prosperity. And at that moment, his gaze, filled with surprise, pierces the void, realizing the true scale of what is happening. He asks about dessert, but the answer from the maid, Valinda, only hints at the uneasy atmosphere that reigns around him. An angry cry erupts from his chest, demanding compensation for the injustice that has befallen his domain. Meanwhile, outside the castle windows, a riot is growing. An outraged crowd is demanding compensation for the canceled holiday. The roar of voices and furious cries of "compensation" echo across the square, threatening to break through the defenses. The castle gates tremble under the onslaught of enraged townspeople, convinced that the lords are wallowing in luxury while the common people suffer. He rushes to the window, his face distorted with horror at the realization of the scale of popular discontent. Valinda has tears in her eyes and says bitterly, "I knew it would be like this," sensing the impending disaster. She explains that the livelihoods of many merchants depend directly on the annual celebrations, which have now been canceled. Last year they were thriving, but now that the festival has been canceled on the second day, their anger knows no bounds. The faces of the crowd are distorted with rage. Every glance is full of despair and irreconcilable protest. "Is it really that bad?" he asks, trying to comprehend the depth of the crisis that has engulfed his domain. He understands that without decisive action, the situation will only worsen, threatening to turn into a full-scale disaster. Turning to old Fergus, he orders the rebels to be pacified, relying on the might of his warriors. But the wise Fergus sadly replies that there are no soldiers. Most of them have been sent to clear the forest of monsters after the orc raids. There is no one to control the riot. The army has departed. Indeed, the northern border is engulfed in the flames of war, and all the warriors have been sent there. There are no soldiers, no resources. Only chaos and despair surround the young lord. In a desperate attempt to find a way out, he turns to Valinda, his housekeeper. The lord asks her to use his personal funds to pacify the rampaging merchants, but her answer was like a bolt from the blue. There's no money either. It turns out that the late count had cut off his son's access to funds because of his previous extravagance. The realization hits him like a heavy burden. He is completely destitute. Even Valinda has nothing to offer him. The situation is hopeless. Sitting by the window, looking out over his estate, he wonders what remains of his former power. After all, even with knowledge of the future, without money, he is powerless. He needs to urgently find a source of funds, and he sets out to search, hoping to find at least something valuable within the walls of his ruined castle. Suddenly, his search is interrupted by the panic of a servant who bursts into the room, screaming. Ricardo, his loyal vassal, can hardly stand on his feet, his face distorted with horror. "We have a problem," Ricardo exclaims breathlessly. "Mr. Kane wants to see you." Kane's name, suddenly called by Ricardo, evokes a strange premonition in the Lord. And before his mind's eye, Kane appears, beaten, bloody, but still holding on stoically. These are not just wounds, but traces of a violent fight. Each blow is delivered with deadly force. And once again, that bestial rage flares up, leaving bloody marks on Kane's face. A guttural groan escapes from the chest of the fallen, a final breath of pain and despair. In a deathly silence, broken only by the rustling of blood, Ghislaine rises above the fallen bodies like a ghost from a nightmare. Barely breathing, an unintelligible whisper escapes from bloodied lips, a question that hangs in the air. But Ghislaine's gaze, full of wild, uncontrollable rage, does not seek answers. His pupils narrow, burning into his memory the image of the enemy who dared to challenge him. And now, from the bloody fog that enveloped his consciousness, a new figure emerges, ominous and powerful. The smile on the man's face, anticipatory and cold, pierces the air like a blade, with a greeting full of contempt. In response to this bold greeting, Ghislaine's gaze only hardened, recognizing in him an old enemy. Like a shadow from the past, he stands before him again, the embodiment of all his suffering. The words, "Hello, Ghislaine," echo, amplified by the reflections of hellfire. Ghislaine nods slowly, his lips parting slightly in a subdued response. Yes, that face, that smile. He remembers them, remembers every trace they left in his life. This is Cain Lodges, heir to lands to which his family is allied, but those ties have long been severed. For Ghislaine, he is not an ally, not a prince, but only an eternal enemy, the personification of betrayal. Cain casually walks past the fallen knight, approaching Ghislaine with the air of a winner. "Ricardo, what happened here?" Ghislaine's voice pierces the tense silence. Ricardo, trying to control his trembling, begins to explain the unrest that brought them here. They found Cain Lodges, surrounded by his knights, who had already managed to cause real chaos here. And when Cain began to question the veracity of the rumors about the young master, the commander seemed unable to hold back the truth. Like the clenched jaws of fate, Cain's grip squeezed every word from him. When Cain, seething with rage, demanded an answer, accusing the commander of lying to the face of the heir of Lodges, the frightened officer seemed to break down, finally saying, "That's how it all came to what you see now." But Cain's anger was insatiable. He demanded the true truth, standing majestically and terrifyingly. And then Cain, with cold cruelty, admitted that he himself had laid a hand on the unfortunate man in order to awaken the remnants of common sense. But then his gaze turned to young Ghislaine, accusing him of spreading falsehoods. Ghislaine, however, did not look away any longer. The fire of long-accumulated resentment flared in his eyes. For Cain, from the very beginning, treated him like a lowly lackey, with no regard for his dignity. Like a wild beast, Cain caused havoc every time he set foot on the lands of Burdium, humiliating everyone around him. No one dared to contradict him when he went too far, because even Ghislaine was forced to obey him. No one ever dared to look down on Cain, on his unyielding greatness. Even Ghislaine himself, mired in an inferiority complex, saw Cain as only the ideal heir. And because of this, his own figure was subjected to even more criticism. Lost in the shadow of his powerful cousin, Cain watched the flash of hatred in Ghislaine's eyes in silence, not saying a word. And then, with a contemptuous grin, he remembered how this brat used to start screaming even from the slightest provocation. So, let's fast forward to the Lodge's estate, shortly before these fateful events. A completely insane order was heard before Cain. "Kill Ghislaine!" The mysterious figure promised the Lodges significant support if Cain could handle this dirty business. But Cain was not simple. He hesitated, because Ghislaine was also the heir to his lands, and it was not so easy to get rid of him. Then the stranger proposed a cunning plan, to provoke a duel and stage an accident that would look like a typical quarrel between heirs. And who would have thought that Cain would be ordered to eliminate his own cousin, promising him an unheard-of opportunity for this? The cousin, consumed by his own lust for power, announced the start of his plan with a satisfied grin. He was going to free his way, not suspecting that he himself had become just a pawn in someone else's game. A smile of anticipation, full of arrogance and greed, played on his lips. Cain, hiding his true thoughts, watched his cousin carefully. Like a master demanding tribute, the cousin ordered Cain to immediately bring what he believed was due to him. He made a mocking reference to the interrupted festival, offering to live things up with his usual provocative behavior. His eyes reflected his usual arrogance and complete lack of respect for anyone. Cain, absorbed in his thoughts, just stood silently, listening to every word. And then he began to understand what exactly his arrogant relative was talking about. Images of his cousin's past visits, always accompanied by demands for women and drink, came flooding back to him. A slight look of disgust flashed across his face, foreshadowing the impending confrontation. Cain recalled how the manager had once refused to give his cousin money because of his extravagance. This memory only strengthened Cain's resolve. Cain's eyes flashed an icy blue, as if about to repel the attack. His gaze, as if in a mirror, reflected the haughty appearance of his cousin, which now seemed only a minor nuisance. The cousin, noticing the lack of reaction, called out his name impatiently. "Come on, don't keep me waiting," he shouted, not hiding his arrogance. His gaze was full of irritation from the unusual disregard. But Cain, with cold firmness, said only one thing. "First, pay your debts. The cousin's companion, who was watching all this, only froze in bewilderment. Hearing this, the cousin looked at Cain in bewilderment, demanding an explanation as to what accounts he was talking about. But when he heard the sum of 1,000 gold pieces, he jumped up, full of indignation, claiming that it was not worth even 100. His voice shook with indignation as he appealed to friendship, urging Cain to write off the debt as a courtesy. However, Cain's cold gaze made his cousin shiver, as if pierced by an icy wind. And Cain, with a barely noticeable sinister smile, calmly retorted that he needed money now more than ever. The entire tavern froze. The cousin's companion whispered in horror, not believing his ears, "Young master, what are you saying?" But in response, Cain only brought his leg down hard, shaking the floor and asserting his unyielding will. His voice sounded dangerous, asking if his cousin had dared to imagine that his former kindness was weakness. Or perhaps he truly believed in his own power, spreading false rumors about imaginary victories, because for Cain he was just a plague that had infected these lands. As if emphasizing every word, Cain clenched his fist, his gaze leaving no doubt. Everything his cousin had done as heir was just an empty imitation. The cousin's arrogant attack, full of confidence in his own superiority, should have been devastating. But Cain met it with icy calm. But, like a shadow, Cain dissolved into space, and the blow passed by, leaving only emptiness where the heir had stood a second ago. As the stunned witnesses tried to comprehend what had happened, their eyes showed undisguised fear of the one who had disrupted their usual order. And so, under the cover of general panic, a new enemy emerged from the shadows, attempting to deliver a sneaky blow in the back to the one they considered a little one. But Cain's speed was elusive. He turned, and his blade like lightning pierced the flesh, painting the moment with scarlet blood. Shock distorted the attacker's face, his eyes widening in disbelief as pain lanced through his body, and only a fragment of a dying breath escaped his lungs. With unprecedented force, the blow threw the enemy's body back, tearing the air with a dull, crushing sound. But at the last moment, he blocked the shot. In his eyes, reflecting echoes of monstrous power, a numbness mixed with cold calculation flashed. And behind him, watching the carnage from the sidelines, the hooded stranger let out an involuntary cry of shock. His subordinate writhed in pain, but the hooded man, Ghislaine, only tightened his grip, ignoring his cries of alarm. The arrogant youth, Cain, contemptuously ordered him to rise, confident that the blow was only superficial. Suddenly, Ghislaine pushed him away, and the gesture was not just anger, but also unbridled strength. There was confusion all around. The tavern guests whispered among themselves in bewilderment, trying to understand who had dealt this blow and how. Cain froze for a moment, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. But the very next moment, an arrogant grin played on his lips. He looked defiantly at Giselle, whose eyes still burned with a cold fire. Gislan gritted his teeth and silently made an internal decision, his gaze full of determination. For Cain, it was the perfect chance to make an impression and secure the support of powerful patrons, and at the same time, get rid of the insignificant birdiums that interfere with his noble image. With feigned indignation, he raised his sword, declaring that Ghislaine had defamed the dignity of the aristocrat with his false attacks. The air around Gisel's clenched fist crackled with anticipation as the challenge was formally issued. Ghislaine rose slowly, his figure looking even more menacing against the backdrop of the fallen Cain. But then a look of genuine shock crossed Cain's face when he saw the blood on his hand. "You attacked my men," Ghislaine said coldly, pointing to the wounded knight who was being helped to his feet. "And this is a disgrace to the dignity of an aristocrat, isn't it?" His eyes flashed an ominous purple light. A heavy silence hung in the air, and Cain and his companions stood frozen, unable to utter a word. "I always knew you were stupid," Ghislaine said with a venomous grin. "But to dig such a deep grave for yourself?" The steel clanged ominously as Ghislaine drew his sword, his whole demeanor accepting the deadly challenge. "Just don't regret it," Gisel's last words echoed in the dead silence. "Even if you die." Shocked, with wide eyes, the observer stood frozen in stunned silence upon hearing the last words. But young Master Cain, whose gaze was cold as ice, was already giving orders, as if not noticing the shadow of death hanging over the arena, only promising someone quick money. Money that was now sorely needed because the festival, the heart of the city, was suddenly canceled, leaving behind only faded ribbons and the unspoken regrets of the crowd. Empty wallets and dejected faces spoke more eloquently than any words about the disappointment that had gripped ordinary citizens. And only in Cain's eyes, deep and piercing, did the unquenchable fire of calculating determination burn. He stood in the center of the arena, under the roar of the crowd, ready for a fight that would decide, if not everything, then a lot. The duel between young Master Cain and Ghislaine is declared open. The herald's voice rent the air, and hundreds of voices raised their voices in praise of Cain, not hiding their contempt for his opponent. Meanwhile, in the square, where a festive spirit had recently reigned, a different kind of bustle now reigned. Noisy trade had given way to more exciting deals. A portly businessman, his eyes sparkling with anticipation, urged the crowd to place bets, promising fabulous winnings. Gold coins rained down on the table, the stakes grew, and everyone believed in Cain's unconditional victory, not allowing any thought to the possibility of any other outcome. In response to this circus, Ghislaine contemptuously plunged his sword into the wooden floor, raising a cloud of dust, as if challenging not only Cain, but the entire greedy crowd. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the din. "How dare you turn a sacred duel into a cheap show?" With a predatory grin full of deadly promise, Ghislaine continued, "My sword will not stop even if you beg for mercy." Cain, however, remained unperturbed, only glancing briefly at his furious opponent, as if thinking about something of his own. But Ghislaine knew that behind this mask of indifference, there were much deeper motives, and with a triumphant look he said, "After all, this is your real goal." Cain, seemingly ignoring the accusations, was about to begin the duel when suddenly, "Stop!" A sharp cry broke the tense silence. A man in a blue cloak flew out of the crowd like a whirlwind, attracting everyone's attention. His words sounded bold and uncompromising. "Personally, I don't think the bet is entirely fair." Puzzled glances crossed the crowd, and whispers ran through the ranks of spectators, trying to comprehend this unexpected intervention. And even the portly bookmaker, scratching his head, was forced to admit, "Well, yes, no one is betting on Mr. Ghislaine, so," he muttered awkwardly, realizing the absurdity of the situation. The crowd roared in anticipation of Cain's easy victory, mocking the chances of young Ghislaine, whom no one took seriously. Cain's gloating grin left no doubt. For him, this was not a fight, but just another opportunity to humiliate his opponent. The bets were no longer placed on victory, but on how long the young man could hold out under the onslaught of an experienced fighter. And then, breaking the general merriment, a bag of gold falls onto the table with a dull thud. It was Lord Ghislaine himself, whose hand, clad in steel armor, rested firmly on the bag. "I bet on my heir." A barely noticeable smile touched the young man's lips, as if confirming that he had accepted the challenge and was ready to fight. Then, with an even louder crash, the second bag fell, spilling out much more gold. Two graceful figures joined the lord, and the younger one added in a ringing voice, "We are also for our brother." The eyes of the spectators widened in astonishment, and Ghislaine Jr. himself looked completely dumbfounded. A whisper ran through the ranks. "Lady Elena? Is it really her?" The young woman, with a slight smile, confirmed the seriousness of her intentions, and the bookmaker, having recovered from the shock, hastily agreed. Meanwhile, a mysterious hooded man, whose true purpose remained unknown, watched closely from the shadows. Cain, irritated by the drawn-out foreplay, was already losing patience, his gaze burning with malice. "Isn't it rude to keep your elders waiting?" he asked haughtily, full of superiority and contempt. In response, Ghislaine, without uttering a word, slowly drew his sword from its sheath, preparing for battle. The blade flashed with a cold light, reflecting the tension that hung in the air of the arena. He took up a stance, gripping the hilt tightly, showing his readiness to accept the challenge. His gaze, usually soft, became hard and piercing, and a fire of determination lit up the depths of his blue eyes. Cain, for his part, responded with the same sharp, predatory gaze in which a thirst for victory was hidden. "Do you think you're so daring that you disobey your superior?" Cain's voice, full of arrogance, sounded again. A moment later, Cain hit the ground, his landing as powerful as his words. Without giving his opponent a second to think, Cain rushed into the attack, bringing down his blade from above. The blade whistled past his face, causing his opponent's eyes to widen in horror. "You have fallen too low to retain any shred of dignity," he growled, his voice full of contempt. The first blow was only the beginning of a furious series, forcing the enemy to desperately dodge. The earth shook under the onslaught of his blows, each of which could have been the last. Cain's sword cut through the air with terrifying force, piercing space. And then, finally, one of the blows hit its target, causing blood to spray into the air. A cheer went up from the crowd. As expected from young Cain, the weakling won't survive even one blow. A smug grin of condescending triumph played on Cain's face. But even after such an attack, There was no fear or despair in the enemy's eyes, only cold determination. Outside the arena, anxiety grew among the spectators. "What should we do? We have to stop them," some whispered. "It is too late," a voice said from the shadows. "Anyone who challenges Kane is doomed." Kane's unstoppable power was overwhelming, depriving him of any chance to counterattack, leaving only grueling dodges. As soon as the enemy lost his breath, opening himself up even for a moment, it became fatal. Kane continued his relentless attack, every move precise and deadly. "You're still as sly as a snake, but I admit your skills have improved a bit," Kane chuckled. Suddenly, after a series of dodges, there was an unexpected counterattack, causing Kane's blade to bounce back. And here it is, the moment when despair gave way to a daring attack. The blow hit Kane in the side. Kane recoiled, a hint of surprise flickering in his eyes for a moment before it turned into a caustic grin. However, this bold attack only added fire to his eyes, and Kane, with his characteristic grace, parried the attack. Cries of horror erupted from the stands as it became clear that young Mr. Ghislaine was in a death trap. Kane's face twisted into a caustic grin, and his voice rang out with the sentence, "You're finished, Ghislaine." He dropped to the ground with unnatural ease, rapidly closing the distance to his victim. Blue mana shimmered around his feet, and his every word pierced the air. "Until now, I have been lenient, but your time is up." With these words, Kane unleashed a powerful and unexpected blow on Ghislaine. Ghislaine barely managed to dodge the sword, but a powerful kick to the chest sent him flying back. For a moment, despair flashed in Ghislaine's eyes, but then it was replaced by concentration. Kane was amazed. Ghislaine held on, gathering all his mana into his legs. With a deep breath, Ghislaine stood up, his body trembling but his spirit unwavering. Kane dismissively remarked that Ghislaine only thought himself invincible by intimidating weaker opponents, but his swordsmanship was abysmal. However, Ghislaine did not flinch. His gaze was cold, and his grip on the hilt of his sword was steel. Kane felt rage boiling in his veins. This guy had dared to contradict him. With renewed vigor, he lunged forward, his blade whistling through the air, ready to cut Ghislaine in half. Every step he took was that of a predator, relentless and deadly. But Ghislaine was ready. At the last moment, he raised his sword, parrying Kane's blow. Kane tried to kick him, but Ghislaine, showing incredible agility, dodged it. A series of lightning strikes erupted, the blades colliding, creating sparks and ringing sounds. Kane's rage erupted, turning each of his swings into a thunderous, devastating blow. The battle turned into a whirlwind of blades and mana, where the two fighters, like shadows, clashed again and again. Kane's fury erupted, transforming each swing into a thunderous, devastating blow. The battle became a whirlwind of blades and mana, with the two fighters clashing again and again like shadows. Kane's swift, finishing blow pierces the air shrouded in radiance and finds its target. The massive enemy falls to the ground, struck in the chest, his gaze filled with shock and sudden pain. Kane freezes, his eyes pools of calm, yet laced with icy, flawless precision. The mighty warrior is defeated. His blade lies nearby on the stone floor, and the arena is stained with crimson drops. The crowd freezes in silent horror and admiration, unable to believe what they see, their faces distorted. The arena explodes with a multi-voiced roar, whispers and shouts. This duel has changed all notions of strength. Even she who has witnessed many battles cannot hide her shock when looking at Kane's triumph. The old judge merely closes his eyes, either in deep thought or in silent recognition of the incredible. But for others watching from afar, this victory only heightened anxiety, causing an ominous premonition. The fallen warrior, though wounded, feels that the blows were not fatal. There was a strange understatement in them. When did this boy manage to wield a blade with such deadly grace? Flashes through his mind. Kane towers over him, silently looking down at his prostrate opponent, his posture radiating unwavering confidence. His gaze reflects not only victory, but also a challenge, a promise of something even more incredible. And suddenly, to everyone's amazement, Kane casually throws his sword into the air. The blade falls with a dull ringing sound onto the stone, joining the sword of the defeated enemy, both lying on the ground. "Such a difference in strength is not spectacular," he says, turning around. "Now I will fight with my bare hands." Shock and anger washed over the fallen warrior once again, his face contorted in disbelief and rage. "I must use this opportunity to teach you a lesson," he breathes, clinging to the last of his strength. Kane just grins, clenching his fist, anticipation of a new battle in his eyes. And fists will be enough for this. Kane, with a defiant smile, proposes a fist fight to give an advantage to an opponent who was inferior to him in fencing. His gaze is full of challenge, and the bold bet of 2,000 gold only adds fuel to the fire. The crowd around is buzzing, amazed not only by the change in rules, but also by the unimaginable amount of the bet. The hooded man's face contorts in shock. This turn of events was clearly not what he had planned, but panic quickly gives way to a sinister grin as he sees an unexpected advantage in this act of recklessness. The herald, taking advantage of the moment, announces additional bets, heating up the atmosphere to the limit. The entire arena is buzzing with anticipation, and most of the spectators are betting on Kane, remembering his previous victories. Kane himself, enveloped in a soft blue light, exudes unshakable confidence, preparing for any outcome. Bertium, finally stepping forward, only smirks mockingly at the proposal, apparently not realizing the true threat. However, at that moment, Bertium grins absurdly and, contrary to all the rules, draws a shiny blade from its sheath. Kane merely extends his hand, as if in silent question, and Bertium is already rushing towards him, sword raised high. "I'll keep my sword!" the giant roars, raising his weapon above his head, filled with cruel triumph. Outraged cries pierce the air as girls in the crowd call for justice and demand that Kane pick up his weapon. But Kane remains unperturbed as Bertium, with a resounding "die," brings his blade down on him. He displays incredible agility, easily dodging a deadly blow that nearly splits the ground. Another lightning-fast movement, and the blade of the sword merely scratches the air above the hero's head, passing by in millimeters. Kane takes a series of quick steps, his feet flickering like blurry shadows across the arena. Bertium misses, his sword sinks into the ground, and Kane, taking advantage of the moment, already goes behind his opponent. A lightning-fast and powerful punch lands on the giant's body, causing him to wince in pain. A cold fire burns in Kane's eyes. Every muscle is tense. He is ready to continue this unequal but exciting dance of battle. The blow landed accurately, knocking the opponent's head back, and a powerful wave of shock rolled through his body. Blood sprays from the broken face, staining the air with crimson droplets as the giant staggers back. He falls to one knee, the sword slipping helplessly from his weakened fingers, his body refusing to obey. The giant's face is distorted with pain and disbelief. His gaze, full of despair, is directed upward, and above him, like an invincible ghost, towers Kane, whose eyes glow with a mysterious, unearthly light. The roar of the crowd echoes throughout the arena, anticipating the young fighter's imminent victory. His name is already on everyone's lips. But for Kane, this is only the beginning. He looks at his fallen enemy with a challenge, demanding more. Humiliation and rage flash in the giant's eyes, awakening the last desperate remnants of strength in him. With a maddened cry, he leaps up, clutching the sword with both hands, ready to bring down his doom. A powerful swing of the massive blade meets Kane's lightning-fast response, and the steel clangs as it repels the attack, reigniting the flames of battle. In a blinding madness, roaring with unthinkable audacity, the giant curses the fighter who dared to raise a blade against him, while Kane continues his deadly dance. And as the giant's fury shakes the earth, Kane sees the weakness hidden behind this blind strength. And so, in the blink of an eye, the steel finds its target, cutting through flesh where fury is powerless. The scream freezes in his throat as realization hits him, a sharp pain tearing through the fog of blind rage, and the Colossus falls, whose strength was only a mask hiding fragility in the face of true mastery. And so the defeated giant, whose power has been exhausted, feels someone else's hand on his hair, pressing him to the bloody ground. The victor leans over him, his words not one of jubilation, but of bitter regret for a legacy that has been consigned to oblivion. It reminds us of old friendships, of help in the darkest hour, of an alliance that could have saved us even now, if not for blindness. His gaze betrays deep disappointment, for the values that his father held dear, the ideals that once bound their families, turned out to be alien to his son. And then an unbearable agony flashes in the eyes of the defeated one, when the truth, like a dagger, pierces his heart, leaving only bitterness and an understanding of his own baseness. Several years ago, when the sun had not yet been tarnished by the shadow of betrayal, a new drama was brewing within the walls of this majestic mansion. The voices of the advisors echoed through the corridors, full of pragmatic selfishness, as they urged them to abandon their aid to the long-fading Bertium family. But the old head of the house, a man of honor, could not simply turn away from his obligations, despite all the persuasions. However, his son, already then distinguished by his cold calculation, pressed his lips into a contemptuous grin, anticipating his own benefits. He gave a short, sharp, "Don't go, father," trying to stop him, but more out of calculation than concern. There was an irritated insistence in his words. Why help those who are doomed when everyone around is saying the opposite? The father, without turning around, only silently and unwaveringly moved on, led by his duty and honor. And so we are transported to the field of another battle, where someone's exhausted body lies defeated, broken, but not broken in spirit. Each blow dug into the flesh, carrying not only physical pain, but also the stamp of despair that clung to the very soul. His face was disfigured, but in this bloody mess there still flickered a spark of life that refused to go out. His eye, barely visible through his swollen eyelids, emitted a strange light, either a dying epiphany or a last hope. And then another figure leaned over him, extending a helping hand. Young Master Ghislaine, whose presence in itself seemed like a miracle. The gaze of the fallen man slowly rises, meeting this gesture of mercy, so unexpected among the crowd thirsting for a spectacle. But his willpower left him, and his head bowed again, as if he had accepted defeat and did not believe in salvation. Ghislaine stood, offering not just a hand, but a chance for a new beginning, while the vanquished sank to his knees, predicting the end. The crowd around froze, stunned by the unexpected turn of events, their faces reflecting a mixture of disappointment and amazement. Whispers ran through the rows as the spectators tried to comprehend what was happening in the arena, as no one expected such an outcome. Particularly shocked was a certain dark-haired man in a hood, whose eyes widened with horror and unfulfilled hopes. A cry of victory echoed across the arena, announcing the triumph of young Ghislaine, who had overturned all predictions and expectations, and only a small group of people who believed in him joyfully rejoiced, celebrating the victory that shone like the dawn over a new era. Like a desperate cry, the echo of defeat echoed across the arena as Ghislaine stood over his fallen opponent. However, the one who had recently been a symbol of power only writhed in rage on the ground, unable to accept his defeat and blaming it on the mistakes of others, not his own. "Get out of my sight," was all the defeated warrior said, trying to escape the shame, while Ghislaine watched this attempt to escape in bewilderment. Rage flared in the young man's eyes. What a pathetic coward! Is someone who claims to be strong really capable of such a thing? And just when the enemy thought it was all over, Ghislaine turned around and a new, cunning spark lit up his gaze. With a sly smile, he said, "It's time to get yours, don't you think?" The enemy seemed to be struck dumb with shock, unable to comprehend the meaning of these words, which portended something more than just victory. But Ghislaine was already addressing the crowd. "People, this valiant man has agreed to treat everyone who came to the feast to meat and drink." A burst of jubilation instantly filled the arena, voices full of joy and anticipation drowning out all other sounds. "I didn't give you that consent. Take it back," the defeated man screamed, trying to regain control. But it was too late. Ghislaine grabbed him tightly by the collar, not giving him a single chance to retreat. "This is the price of defeat," Ghislaine said calmly, "and you will have to accept it. This is not just part of our wager, it is your honor." And he added, as if in a light whisper, but with iron firmness, "Don't forget, 2,000 gold pieces on top of the 1,000 you've already bet." His gaze turned black for a moment, like an abyss, and a dark aura flickered around him, hinting at something terrible that would befall his opponent if he disobeyed. A look of genuine horror flashed in the eyes of the fallen man. His lips trembled, trying to squeeze out at least a word, but only inarticulate sounds escaped from his throat. Finally crushed, he could only croak, "I understand," as Ghislaine released him, allowing the shame to consume him completely. And so, the echo of triumph spread across the city, and the majestic towers of the castle, which had witnessed this incredible victory, rose above the arena. The next day found Ghislaine in his chambers, where the sun's rays filtered through the elegant stained glass windows, promising a new beginning. But the real shock awaited him at the open chest, the contents of which literally blinded him. His eyes widened at the sight of the mountain of gold coins that were now his, payment for his audacity and skill. He sorted through the gold coins, thinking that this amount would be enough to hire a small squad of mercenaries. However, this path seemed too long to him, and his thoughts were already striving for faster and more effective preparations. But his concentration on his plans was prevented by the sudden appearance of two companions, whose presence was felt especially keenly. He looked up, a hint of irritation in his eyes, and asked briefly what they wanted. The younger of them, with a sly smile, immediately got down to business, asking what he was going to spend his fortune on. The hero cautiously threw out a counter question, trying to understand the hidden meaning in her innocent curiosity. The elder one, without hiding her triumph, declared that the answer was completely obvious, casting a meaningful glance in his direction. She approached, confident that she was right, and said directly that this whole show was started for the sake of an expensive gift. With a slight mocking laugh, she added that he was too predictable in his actions. While he turned away, not hiding his irritation, the younger one quietly muttered about showing off for the sake of a certain bride. At that moment, a strange, cold fire flashed in his eyes, as if awakening long-forgotten memories. He said out loud in shock what had just struck him. Does he really have a fiancée? The girls were unanimously outraged by his shamelessness, recalling his name, Amelia, daughter of Count Rayfold. The name pierced him through and through, causing his eyes to glow with an ominous purple light. Horrifying images appeared before his mind's eye. That woman, entangled in bloody webs. Amelia Rayfold's name flashed through his mind, surrounded by an aura of red menace. He remembered the poisonous beauty that hid the rot, the Witch of the North, who was supposed to lead the rebellion. The realization struck him like lightning. She was the one who had helped Duke Delphin overthrow the Bertium family, the real traitor. Coming out of his trance, he turned to Valinda, coldly inquiring about the time of his father's return. A ruthless determination appeared on his face. A week would be enough to change the course of history. Without wasting a second, Eugene announced his intention to immediately go to the Rayfolds, causing Valinda to flinch in confusion. With a sly grin on his face, he explained that it was time to collect old, forgotten debts. Meanwhile, Lady Amelia, having thrown off her shoes from her tired feet, was in a deep, almost painful thought. Her scarlet eyes, darkened by the shadow of immense sadness, looked at the world with silent pleading, and an ominous spider froze on her lip. Suddenly, she knelt down before a frightened, ragged child, surrounded by a whispering, amazed crowd. The little girl's eyes, covered in dirt and dust, reflected pure amazement at the kindness shown. Amelia, raising her head with dignity, declared imperiously that if anyone was destined to walk barefoot on these lands, it was her. Then her voice sounded like an order. Provide immediate shelter and food to all those in need. The soldiers obeyed, distributing supplies to the shocked but infinitely grateful peasants, whose hearts were touched. Barefoot Lady Amelia stood in the middle of the courtyard, receiving a discordant chorus of sincere, desperate gratitude. Later, in the privacy of a cozy gazebo, a devoted servant bent down to wash her tired feet. It was Bernard, her faithful bodyguard, who noted her hard, noble work with tender care. Amelia, stroking the lazily purring cat, spoke thoughtfully about the despotic will of her father, demanding absolute obedience. The soft touch of fluffy, warm fur was the only source of comfort in this anxious moment. Bernard, full of unwavering determination, assured the lady that her noble deeds had borne fruit, and he would turn the race for the inheritance to her advantage. Amelia just looked at him silently, as if weighing his every word, hiding her true thoughts. But suddenly, with a light, lightning-fast movement of her leg, she slapped him across the face. With icy reproach in her voice, she asked about his shameful, forgotten duel with the great swordmaster of the North. Humbly, with her foot in his face, Bernard explained his defeat as a desire to remain in the shadows, avoiding unnecessary attention. Then, gently taking her graceful leg in his hand, he swore to serve her forever with his sword, until his last breath. But his submission did not soften her. On her lips there was frozen the symbol of a much more ancient and insidious power. A silent gesture. Her fingers sharply squeezed his chin, causing him to flinch and look up. The eyes, blazing with scarlet fire, came closer, and in every word there was an inexorable will. You cannot be weak. And just as suddenly, as if she had discarded an unnecessary object, her thoughts switched to the next puzzle, the trading guild. The henchman reported, the Activum Guild cleverly bought up all the materials needed to build a strategic outpost in the wild lands of the Bertiums, returning the funds they had previously lost. Moreover, all the soldiers and knights who had left those devastated lands were bought out, a valuable acquisition, hardened in battles with the barbarians. Very well, came her command. Continue to maintain the image of a modest guild, while our true intentions remain in the shadows. Suddenly the peace was broken by a hasty knock, and a pale, out-of-breath servant appeared at the door, bearing alarming news. Bernard, rising, stopped him abruptly, but the servant's words made him freeze. His lordship Ghislaine Bertium has arrived for a visit. The shadow of a predatory spider flashed across her face again, and in her eyes, which flared scarlet again, only one question could be read. What is this walking problem doing here? Bernard froze, but his reaction made the servant turn even paler, anticipating anger. Bernard's eyes widened in shock, while behind him, Amelia was already seething with unspoken rage. Meanwhile, the uninvited guest already felt like a rightful master in the luxurious interiors of the living room. She sat on the velvet sofa, clutching the disgruntled cat in her arms, while his figure radiated a striking calm. Ghislaine, sitting at ease, said with a slight grin, "Hello, Amelia." In response, her scarlet eyes narrowed to slits, and the cat in her arms hissed, foreshadowing a storm. "Do you know that it is bad manners to show up unannounced?" she asked with icy disdain. "Have you really lost even the last of your manners?" He just grinned smugly, as if enjoying her anger, and said, "Your birthday is coming soon, right? I decided to give you the gift early." Then he casually placed the flower on the table, noting that he had found it at the guild's facade, and now intended to buy flowers only there. And with a sly grin, as if enjoying the effect, he added, "Oh, that's right, the Actium Guild." Her bloodshot gaze did not bode well. But our hero seemed to be completely oblivious to the hints, continuing his dangerous games. The girl turned around abruptly and declared that the gift had been accepted, and it was time for him to leave. In response, there was only one word, cold as steel. "Sit down." The crimson lights lit up her eyes again, and a threatening aura noticeably thickened around her. She felt an invisible pressure, amazed at the transformation of the one who had recently trembled at her appearance. Meanwhile, without a shadow of embarrassment, he got to the point. He needed money. No more, no less than 10,000 gold coins. The shock on the girl's face was so great that she could only exhale questioningly. She couldn't believe that he had come to ask his bride for money, asking directly whether this was the will of the entire county. And in response, he only boldly retorted that she still wouldn't marry him. Anger flared in her eyes again, dispelling the remnants of her composure. He nodded towards the door with a casual smile, as if indicating the true air of her heart. But the real danger lay in his next words, the threat to reveal her secret desire for power for the sake of the guild. Even his pet sensed this dark threat, and Ghislaine Bertium himself froze in silent shock. She warned that such words should not be said even as a joke. Otherwise, but he hastened to reassure her that he would keep the secret, unless, of course, she left him without money, to which she only smiled mysteriously. And then, as if by magic, the heavy doors swung open. An imposing man with a stern look and a combat sword on his belt stepped out of the doorway. The stranger bowed and greeted Ghislaine as if he were an old friend. It was Bernard, Amelia's strong support, a warrior whose strength could already rival that of the northern swordmasters. Gillen, testing their resolve, asked if they could stand firm in the coming war if he fell here, but Bernard only smiled coldly, laying out the assassination scenario like a newspaper report. A predatory fire burned in her eyes, and with a cigarette in her slender fingers, Amelia pronounced her merciless sentence. "Get rid of him." The unyielding Bernard, having drawn the blade, merely bowed his head, expressing his complete readiness to fulfill the will of the mistress. In that moment of realization, while the world around him slowed down, Gillen plunged into his thoughts, gathering his will into a fist. And as he raised his sword, his gaze cleared. The time for games was over. It was time to get serious.